my thoughts about the Texas A&M defense from a big picture standpoint, I think we saw it making that transition from the Big 12 in 2012 to the SEC, and that was a rough transition. And if there wasn't a certain number 2 on the offensive side of the ball to put up 45 or 50 points, it would have been a rough transition for Texas A&M, but it all glossed over because there were a lot of those 45-42 wins. And this defense, as you pointed out in some tweets that we traded back and forth, some messages back and forth, was all-time worst in some measurements, some categories. Not saying the all-time worst in the SEC overall, but if you take certain measurements, I just think the transition from the style of play that you see in the Big 12, where you got to play in space, you got to play with speed, and then all of a sudden you've got pulling guards, you got just road graders coming at you. I just think this Texas A&M defense took a couple years just from the mentality standpoint, let alone a talent or physical standpoint, just to transition from, hey, we're running around Texas Tech and Baylor wide receivers, and we're trying to chase these kids down, to, oh, we got 2 future NFL offensive linemen pulling in front of Leonard Fournette, and we got to play big man football. And just from a mindset standpoint, Texas A&M wasn't ready for it. They're catching up from a talent standpoint. The recruiting rankings would tell us that, and we've seen them buck up a little bit in the last year or two. So you can kind of explain from there what you see.
Yeah, A&M, with the addition of Chavis from LSU, obviously made strides this last year, going from 102nd in pass defense the year before to 51st under him. Of course, the rushing defense still wasn't where you want it to be. They still gave up over 2,700 yards, coming in at number 13 in the SEC this past season, which gave them like a number 8 overall total defensive ranking in the conference. And so they know that that's an area where they have to work on. Chavis came out and said that was going to be a guarantee, that it was going to be much better. With Kiki, Dalen Mack, you've got Myles Garrett on one side, you got Deshaun Hall on the other. You got 2 great bookends. If you can get some pressure, which we talked about the fact Dalen Mack is a freshman phenom last year, and a lot of people were saying watch out for Kiki on the interior as well. Those guys could really disrupt some things. And if that defense can get any better and you allow your linebackers a little bit of space to kind of get in the gaps, and Chavis knows this better than anybody. He's done great work at LSU. We've looked at LSU's total defensive stats for the last several years, and a lot of times they're in the top 5, top 3 year in and year out, for the exception of this last year. So you take a look at that, and you know that he's going to be able to put the production and get guys in the right places. And A&M's got the talent. You made a remark about that, Mark. As far as recruiting is concerned, they've recruited a lot of really highly talented guys right there in their home state of Texas. The Houston area has been really good to A&M. And so you turn around and you've got this talent, but you've got to fix that rush defense. You go back and you look, I mean, it's 5 yards plus on average. I mean, go back to 2013, which was absolutely atrocious after their first year. Their first year in 2012 was awesome. A&M came out defensively, looked great. Had one of the better rush. Only gave up about 1,100 plus yards in rush. Gave up some yardage in pass, but they had a great, I believe it was number 8, number 9 in the SEC as far as total defense was concerned in 2012. In 2013, 2014, I mean, they're giving up massive amounts of yards per play. In 2013, gave up over 6 yards per play. And that's just a lot. Even in, I don't care what Power 5 conference you're in, that's a lot of yardage to be given up per play. So you're telling me in 2 plays, I'm giving up a first down, basically, if you look at that statistically, if you want to take that number for what it's worth. But if you want to get really granular in this thing, you can start looking at the fact that, A&M has made a lot of transitions. And again, you talked about the fact that they went from a Big 12 to an SEC. And I think that they finally made the steps to finally, get an SEC quality defensive coordinator. I think them going after Chavis was a home run. Chavis will be able to put things together there. We know that. We know that Chavis has had success. He's been at Tennessee. He's been at LSU. He's had success as a defensive coordinator. The man knows what he's doing. Secondary is his specialty. And, of course, we saw the fact that, like I said before, A&M secondary really stepped up. You go back to that 2013 season, 2,890 yards. Let me put this into just kind of a picture for everybody that's watching this right now or will watch it. If you go and you look at 2013, 2,890, 2808 in 2014 and 2778 this last year in rushing defense. Okay, that's pretty darn close to 3,000 yards. You go back to 2008, your worst rush defense was Arkansas, and they gave up 2,049 yards. That's a pretty drastic difference between those numbers and what we're seeing from A&M. You go back into 2009, and Vanderbilt had the worst at 2,300. Okay, still a big number gap difference. You go back to 2010, Vanderbilt again, 2,300. So you're starting to see the consistency here, right, that I'm talking about. Massive difference between what A&M came in with to what, he's saying they're going to have this next year. So my thought process is when he makes a guarantee like that, it's pretty easy to do because I don't feel like you can get a whole heck of a lot worse. That being said, they've pretty much proven that you can from that 2013 season, 2014 season. So I guess there is that aspect. But I do feel like A&M with Chavis and again with the players that I mentioned, they can make a difference this year. But they're going to have to be able to, if you want to be in the SEC, if you want to get to that next level, if you don't want to be a guy that's at the middle of the road in the SEC West every year, you better have one heck of a defense, and you got to have a rush defense. And like you talked about before, yeah, you can give up the points back and forth, 45, 42 type of games, but that will not get you to the championship, and we've seen that. Just because you beat Alabama, A&M, does not mean that you get to the championship game. So I think that you have to correct those issues up front. Chavis knows that. They spent the entire spring harping on it. Deshaun Hall's been quoted as saying that, the guys feel a lot more experienced. They feel like they know the system a lot better. There's a lot more communication, both on the front and the back end with the secondary as well. So it seems like things are really gelling together. And if that's the case, this Chavis defense could be the saving grace for Sumlin and all the drama that we've had to deal with A&M coming out in the offseason as well.
You know what I'm seeing here, Chad, is you're racking up the numbers and really comparing the progress or lack thereof up until 2015, and then the nice step up in pass defense, but getting beat up on the ground. We saw it. I think the classic shot was the Jeremy Hill a couple Thanksgivings ago, just annihilating. No, that was Leonard Fournette as a freshman. I take that back. That was Fournette as a freshman. That wasn't Hill against, I forget who the DB was, a really good player for Texas A&M on Thanksgiving night. That's kind of the microcosm of Texas A&M playing big boy football in the SEC and not being ready for it. And as you were talking, I just wanted to double check some of the things I had thought in scanning some of these games. So I watched a lot of these games for Texas A&M this last season. So I did a little nitpicking while you were running this down, and you would expect Alex Collins, Leonard Fournette, Derrick Henry to have huge games against everybody, and they did, and also against A&M. So we'll throw them to the side knowing that they put up big numbers. But Jovan Robinson had his best rushing game of the season against Texas A&M. He ripped them up for $159. Brandon Wilds in South Carolina, they weren't running the football against too many decent teams. He ran 17 for $128 against A&M. Perry Orth, and this is the other thing that comes to the forefront, is that quarterbacks ran well out of the spread, either when the plays broke down or just running out of the spread formation in design plays. Perry Orth, 11 for 64, a nice 6 yards per carry. And as we both know in college football, that's even taken the sack yardage into account. So he probably ran for more. Dak Prescott had a 100-yard game rushing against Texas A&M. Ole Miss, and this is one of the knocks we've had against the Rebels in recent years, is they might have made it to Atlanta with a marginal rushing attack. But Jalen Walton, 22 for 97, and then the big number came right at the end of the season. They would have won a bowl game against Louisville, but Lamar Jackson ran it 22 times for 226 and 4 touchdowns against the Aggies in that 6-point bowl loss.
Yeah, that's EA video game numbers, right? 22 carries. I mean, that's 10-plus yards. That's phenomenal to me.
For a kid that can't throw the ball. So they had to be stacked up against the run. Yeah,
and that was the thing. A&M, if you go back specifically, looking at some of the Arkansas games in the last couple of years with Brett Bielema being there, you knew what was coming at you, and they could stack the box with 8 deep, and they still couldn't find a way to stop those guys. Granted, the offensive line had a lot to do with that, but still, the matter of fact is, if you're an SEC defense, you should be able to stack the box with 8 and be able to at least hold them to some type of minor yardage there. But they found a way to gash them left and right. And when you bounced them to the outside, you closed off guys like, Myles Garrett, Deshaun Hall. If you were able to put, chip blocks on them, open some things up, you can definitely make it hard on them. And that's an area where they're going to have to improve. You saw last year, even despite the fact of giving up 2,800 yards this last year on the ground, Myles Garrett, Deshaun Hall combined for 17.5 sacks. So that tells me that they were still finding ways to get to the quarterback, but yet, like you just mentioned, statistically, teams were just running it down their throat on the interior. That's an area where they have to step up, and you're going to look at a guy like Daylon Mack, and of course you're going to look at Kiki as two guys that have to step up for them in that position, and they're going to have to be there at the point of attack. They're going to have to be very aggressive, and I think A&M is finally kind of we're starting to see the trend now with Chavis. Chavis has come in and said, hey, you want to be an SEC caliber defense, this is what it's going to take. And I've heard nothing but the fact that they are very physical in practice. He's after them. He's getting after them. He's bringing physicality to the table. These guys are being very physical at the point of attack in practice. So that's a change in mindset, not just physicality, but also a change in the mindset and their approach. You also go from the fact that when A&M first came into this conference, they had that Big 12 secondary where a lot of times you had 5-10 yards padding between the players, and you can't do that in the SEC. SEC teams live and die by the 5-6 yard dink and dunks here and there. That's just how it works. A lot of times it's how sometimes you have to win close games that way. And so they had to adjust to that pretty quickly. And obviously, statistically, they just didn't. And teams were able to beat them up left and right on short yardage things. You could hit them underneath. And if you're doing that and you're getting 5-6 yard chunks at a time, Mark, you know as well as I do, that makes for a very long game, and your defense gets wore down really, really quickly. And I just don't think they had the depth, the caliber of depth that you see in the SEC. And, through recruiting, maybe they've got it now. And that's something I'm still interested to see. I know that everybody talks about that front four, but let's talk about the depth after those front four, because that's an area where they're going to have to really show this season. 12 games, 14 games, whatever it may be. It's a long in the SEC West. It's a long grinding season. So let's see how that depth works out for them as well.
Chad, there's a handful of programs around the country that intrigue me because of this. Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, how long is he going to stay? We know that they're going to be good. They were good last year, but are they going to be great? UCLA, Jim Moore got it started. Now he's kind of hitting a wall. He's we saw the definite progress for a couple of years, and now they've kind of leveled off. If you go to the ACC, what's Mark Richt going to do at Miami with that recruiting base? And is he just a 9-3 coach, or is he revitalized? We've got some glimpses of him really being energized by a new beginning there at Miami, his alma mater. In the SEC, for me, it's Arkansas and Texas A&M that intrigue me, because if you said, okay, everybody plays 12 games, what are these teams' records going to be in the next 4 years, over 48 games? I think I could come within a couple games of predicting what Alabama and LSU are going to do the next 4 years, and even Mississippi State, who's generally an 8-4 team most times. And then going out to the East, pretty much I got a gauge on everybody across the board. Missouri obviously shot out those first couple years, or their second and third years in the league under Gary Pinkel, but wow, they've got some serious challenges. Texas A&M, they come into the league, hot coach, hot quarterback. They take over Texas recruiting from the University of Texas. They're on the ascension. They win 10 games that first year, plus the bowl game. They win 11 games. They finish close to the top 5 in the country. The next year, not quite as good, but those recruiting classes are coming in at top 5, and we just expect this program's gonna hit its stride. It's all coming together. And now they can't keep a quarterback on scholarship. They bring in the big recruits, but they can't keep them. They keep promising. We hear stories of promises given to these big shot recruit quarterbacks, and now there's a little dissension. There's some bad pub out there. It's not Kevin Sumlin can't do any wrong, is what the storyline was a couple of years ago. Where's this program going now? I could see them being a 6-6 program for the next 5 years, or maybe he's got a little bit of life left in him and can right the ship here.
Yeah, we'll see. And I think that's going to be the thing when you're talking about hot seats. talking about Stoops at Kentucky. You're talking about A&M, someone. You're talking about Auburn, Malzahn. Can Chavis, with his guarantee, save Sumlin's career? At A&M, that's the big question, because I think there are parts of the fan base that maybe are kind of becoming a little disenfranchised with him, especially after the situation with the quarterbacks broke out and the chemistry there, the promises made to not just players but family members as well. A lot of insight has come out since then. Someone's been asked as of recent about that, and he's talked about the fact that there's great team chemistry. But again, those things to me are coach speak, because of the fact that we know better than that now. And so, that'll be the thing, and that's a storyline to follow. The success of A&M this season, how well they do, could seriously dictate someone's future. A&M is a school that has a lot of money, obviously, $425 million plus that they just put into renovating a new stadium. Granted, it did go over by about $75 million from what I understand. So that may have left them in a little bit of a bind. But that being said, Sumlin is in no position to be in the losing side of things in the SEC this year, and I think he's definitely got to make strides. And I think that that's something that he knows, as well as the rest of the staff. So it very well could be the fact that the success of defense for A&M could be the story that you have to follow for them. If they find success, then possibly someone stays. If the defense does not progress as well as we think it does, it could be that someone finds his way out the door.